no. Para mí,
Come on. Can we move it on? That's it, baby.
Pero estos dos que viven contigo.
I know you're on a roll.
Deborah Feldman es una mujer con una vida fascinante en muchos sentidos, una vida dura también en muchos sentidos. Es una escritora estadounidense. Actualmente ella vive en Berlín, en Alemania. Y bueno, pues ahora yo acabo de terminar de ver una serie que está basada en uno de sus libros, que se llama Poco Ortodoxa y que además es número 1 en todas partes. Y de ahí mi interés de hablar con Deborah, de conversar con ella, y ella de manera muy generosa aceptó. Ella está ahora en Berlín y yo tengo el gusto de saludarla, Deborah Feldman. Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi. Entiendo un poco.
¿Hablas español? ¡Ay, qué bien! Well, actually, you're very good at languages. That's what I've heard.
At understanding them, certainly. I don't speak them as well as I'd like to, because I think you have to really live somewhere to speak the local language. But it has always been my dream, to unlock cultures by being able to speak the language. And I spent the last 5 years in Germany trying to convert my native Yiddish into German, which I have done quite successfully, I think. And as soon as I felt I had accomplished that, I immediately moved on to 3 other languages at once.
Which are?
Of course, I decided to focus on the Romance languages, which is why I was simultaneously looking at Spanish, Italian, and French.
Yeah.
Because there is still this relationship to Latin, which means there is, English is still a resource. And I feel very European. So I wanted to sort of tackle the European languages, because we used to live in a world where we could just cross over and be in this other language space, which now is gone. This world is
now
gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Which means that the only thing we have left is this communication. And so language becomes more important than ever. And I will still hold on to this dream of one day being able to speak to all kinds of people, because I have those linguistic keys.
I was just saying to the audience that you have a fascinating life and story, but also very painful.
Yeah, you said duro, and duro is hard, right?
Duro is hard, exactly.
Hard.
Exactly. You were born and raised in the States in the middle of a very oppressive community. I would like to, if on behalf of the audience, if you would like to tell us what's that,
sure.
And what's this very Orthodox Jewish community?
I will preface that explanation by saying that it is difficult for me to use words like duro for my story, because, living on a planet, with tremendous amounts of suffering occurring at all times, being raised in a community that was founded by people who had suffered, the worst, most unimaginable persecution, it's difficult for me to talk about what I experienced as suffering or as difficult. Mm-hmm. Because I've always compared my own suffering to the suffering of the people who raised me and the suffering of humanity in that sense. Suffering was always very big where I come from.
Your grandparents raised you.
Yes.
And they survived the Holocaust. That's what you mean.
Yes. And when, I was raised in their home, which is in a sense unusual, because I was like a first generation after the survivors. And we know about the trauma that the first generation experienced, but we don't know very much about the second generation. I was somewhere in between. And when you grow up with the shadow of the Holocaust over your life, you don't believe that you have the right to complain or the right to see your own experiences as worthy of empathy or compassion, because they feel so small in the shadow of that great event. And so I was raised in a community that was founded after World War II. Even though many people think that it's a very old community because it looks old, it's actually new. And it was founded by survivors who were traumatized and who felt guilt for surviving. And as a result, they
because the other ones didn't survive.
Yeah, and they wondered, why did they deserve this? And then there came a rabbi who said to them, I can explain everything. I can explain why the Holocaust happened. I predicted that it would happen. And he said, the Holocaust was a punishment from God for the assimilation of the Jewish people and for Zionism, because the Jewish people forgot that they were in exile, forgot that they were supposed to wait for the Messiah. And he says the only way to prevent another Holocaust from occurring is to take all these old Jewish rituals and traditions and to reinterpret them in a very extreme way in order to appease God's anger. And all of these people he spoke to, these survivors, they already felt so guilty and so uncomfortable, in their newfound freedom. They didn't even want to pursue a happy and free life because they felt too guilty to do so. And they happily accepted this explanation as an excuse to continually deprive themselves and to deal with their trauma. So this entire community was founded on trauma. And every rule we followed, the reason for it was always that great trauma, the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And you don't question, as a child, you don't question rules when the explanation for these rules is this suffering. You accept these rules without question. And it takes a lot of strength to resist, that message, to say, yes, there has been great suffering, but this suffering cannot be the reason why we continue to suffer.
Okay, so why is Satmar the name? That's because of the rabbi?
Because the rabbi comes from a small town on the border of Hungary and Romania that was called Satu Mare. And in general, Hasidic communities are usually named after the towns where the rabbis come from.
Okay.
And I think the reason for this is they kind of want to keep this old lost world alive, in the name.
And how is the Hasidic world? I mean, again, so people can understand, what is it?
The Hasidic movement, when it began in 18th century Eastern Europe, was actually a very radical revolutionary movement, quite comparable to the traditions of Luther in Christianity, right? This idea that it is no longer the authorities that mediate between man and God, but man can talk directly to God under any conditions. And in that sense, it was very revelatory in its time, and it was also very mystical, but it changed over the next 200 years because of competing movements such as the Enlightenment or political emancipatory movements or Zionism, because it felt threatened by these movements, because other Jewish people were looking toward these other movements for new alternative ways of living, and they no longer were the most popular and the most dominant movement. So as a result, they responded to the movements toward modernity and emancipation by becoming more extreme and more limited already before the war. But the war was a catalyst for the Hasidic community to transform worldwide into a deeply fundamentalist community with a set of beliefs that doesn't really resemble the original Hasidic belief system. Because the original Hasidic belief system was in its own way emancipatory, and much of that has been rejected as a result of the Holocaust. So now you have the Hasidic movement worldwide consisting of various different sects with, minor differences in belief and practice. But what they share is this idea in the end, the belief of the end times, the waiting for the Messiah, waiting to be redeemed by God. And, many people in this world see this crisis that we're going through right now as just more proof that we're in that time, and this is the birth pangs of the Messiah, which, to be honest, almost every Jewish generation has believed at some point. The tradition goes back very far.
Okay, but in this Hasidic community, the movement and the community you grew up, it's a very restrictive and oppressive for women, maybe principal to women, but also for men, right? I mean, you grew up without reading, without learning, without going to school, without watching TV, without listening to music. I mean,
Yes, I mean,
there's
I
the
would
world.
agree
You
with
know,
you.
there was a world outside.
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, I knew, but, they told me it was a very bad place. It is true what you say, that both men and women, experience oppression in this community.
Much more women, right?
Well, yes, I do think this is the case, although I wouldn't say in every aspect it's worse for women. There are some aspects in which men do suffer more. But mostly, yes, it is the women that are blamed when things go wrong. And we are led to believe that our bodies and the way we present our bodies in the world is somehow directly connected to the events that occur. And so this is why you have like signs hanging in the communities now that say coronavirus is a punishment for women who wear short skirts. There's always somehow this connection that if women aren't policed, God will be angry. And so there is more pressure on women for sure. But like I said earlier, because this community was founded by people who felt too guilty to live a happy and free life, many of them welcomed this oppression initially. The problem arises only with later generations who no longer can make that connection between the trauma of suffering and, the choice to submit to oppression.
Now tell me something. When did you start feeling that you didn't belong there? Because it's
actually
very
from
difficult.
A very early age. Yes. I think one thing we can see, at least in the series already, is that Esty is already unique in her community because of the story around her parents' marriage, which means that she's already made to feel different at a young age. And when you are made to feel different, you automatically see yourself also as different, and you see the community with the perspective of an outsider. So in that sense, I was already standing on the margins, at least, mentally and emotionally from a young age. But physically is a whole different question, right? I mean, it's one thing to feel like you're outside, but it's another thing to take the step toward the outside.
Yeah. When did you decide? I mean, what you needed to be like very strong, and you like to say, this is not my life. This is not what I want. And you were already married when you left.
Yes. I mean, I will be very honest with you about that. I mean, there is something here that, is probably not coming across in the series because it's very difficult to show. And it's something that that was my central goal in writing the book Unorthodox, was to try to show the process that leads to making the decision to leave, which is a slow, long process that starts early and builds with time. But certainly the trigger for leaving, the trigger toward which I had been building was the birth of my son. I think the reason for that is, I mean, you say it requires strength to leave, and I would say that is true. But I think what it requires even more is a sense of desperation and a feeling of having nothing to lose. And it takes a long time to reach that point. But it seems to me, when I speak to other people who've left, that is what is required, that you need to reach that point of no return where there's really nothing to lose, and it's either leave or die.
Now, you were very close to your grandmother.
Yes.
Very close to her. And then, and you said, even if I'm so close, because they were good, they are good people. Everybody's good people. Yes. There. I mean, they're not, but there was a greater good for you. You needed to show your son there's another way to live.
Yes. But I have to say, I mean, when I left, my grandmother had already been suffering from dementia for quite a few years.
Already?
So in a way, I had already lost her. And I think this also made it possible for me. I can't imagine what it would have been like to leave knowing that she was fully conscious of losing me. That would have been unimaginably difficult. In a way, it was like she set me free. And that's something we tried to show in the series as well. When Esty calls her grandmother at the end of the second episode, and it's a very, very emotional moment because She's just found out that all of her fantasies and dreams about her life in the outside world were unrealistic. And all she wants is to speak to that one person who's always given her a sense of security. And her grandmother doesn't answer. Her grandmother hangs up. And our first impression can be she's being cruel. But we can also ask ourselves if maybe she's letting Esty go.
Mm.
There was always that ambivalence for me with my grandmother's
interpretation, right? Yeah.
Well, it's interpretation that is based on my own experience of the relationship that I had with my grandmother, where things were never quite clear. Like, early in the book, I described discovering a forbidden book in her drawer and asking myself, how can it be that this woman who follows all the rules is hiding a book? And that relationship was ambivalent from an early age, because I always asked myself, what does she really believe? How does she really feel? And it was never clear. You
never got to ask her, right? I mean, you were very close, but you weren't very talkative. I mean,
right. We didn't have that kind of relationship. I mean, in this community, closeness is not communicated with words or with gestures. It's something that's very hidden, and it's very much under the surface. And it's something because there are certain codes that other people would never be able to interpret. But certainly we never talked about these things. No.
You were married at 17 in an arranged marriage, the same as your mother and the same as your grandmother, for sure. When they told you were going to get married at 17, what did you feel? I mean, you were
I was hopeful. I was very hopeful, because I looked around me. Yeah, I looked around me at the women who had power. They were all married, and I thought, well, when I get married, I will also finally have power. I will also finally be independent and be free. I didn't realize that these women were trading something in to achieve that power that I wasn't willing to trade. There is a scene in the series where Esty's aunt tells her, you will never have any leverage until you have a baby. And that's a very important sentence, because it shows you that women in this community can achieve power, but to do so, they have to follow a certain path. And that path in itself is a check on power.
You had to go through there.
Yeah.
And you took time to have to have your son, right?
That wasn't even a choice, right? I simply couldn't get pregnant. Right? Just like we see in the series, certainly I had a desire to do what was expected of me. And certainly I got married knowing that it was expected of me to have children. And I didn't question that. It was only the moment that I got pregnant that I realized, oh my God, what have I actually done? Now there's going to be an innocent human being coming into this world and is going to live the life I've lived. And that's my fault. That was the moment where I realized this cannot continue. But it took me a long time.
Do you feel guilty because of that?
Very much, yeah.
Very much, yeah. Now, with time and distance, do you understand a little bit more that people? Do you understand what they do, their rules?
I think so,
yeah. Have you ever felt guilty of being Jewish, for example, and doing those things?
No, I don't really struggle with guilt, because I feel that if ever there are
that's very Jewish. That's very Jewish. The guilt.
Yeah, no, but I don't. I think I've been able to leave that behind. Like I've been in therapy for years. I mean, it's something I work on. But whenever I feel that there are difficulties, when people misunderstand each other, when things are miscommunicated, my reaction to this is simply to try to communicate better, to try to facilitate more dialogue, to build more bridges, to strive for understanding. My reaction is not guilt, because guilt is not necessarily a useful emotion. I tend to try to focus on more positive emotions, or at least sort of focus on that which can be accomplished, not which cannot be changed.
Why did you decide to move to Berlin? Why Germany? Isn't it ironic? I mean, if
I was living in
you've heard all your life that evil was there, no?
Yeah. Although I have to make 2 points. I have to say, on the one hand, the Jewish community that I come from doesn't view the Holocaust as an exceptional event, but rather an event as part of a pattern of events. So when we grow up learning about the Holocaust, we grow up learning about all episodes of persecution of Jews as like one long chain, and the Holocaust is just the most recent version, like the recent event in that chain. So yes, Germany was considered the epitome of evil because it was the most recent source of evil, but we were taught to see the entire outside world as the enemy of the Jews. And, you know, of course, if I was living in Heidelberg right now or Marburg, you could say, why Germany? But of course, Berlin is something of an exception even in Germany. But it is true that what Berlin and what Germany, as a result, offers me as someone who grew up in a society so influenced by the Holocaust and then left and discovered that Americans don't think about the Holocaust at all, that I was very alone with my burden of memory. You know, I had inherited this burden from my community, and I felt very obligated to sort of keep memory alive. And I was very alone with that obligation in America. But in Germany, you're not alone with that. In Germany, the act of memory is collective and it's constant. So that can be a relief for someone like me. It makes you feel like you can honor the past, but also be in the present. But I will say that, of course, my initial attraction to Berlin was very contemporary. Berlin is an exciting, vibrant city full of people from all over the world who often have no roots or have no place they can call home or go back to. And it's a city where you can belong very quickly as a result. It's a very open place, and it has a kind of rebellious value system. It doesn't necessarily buy into traditional capitalist values. And if you come from a spiritual community the way I do, you don't necessarily want to trade in your spirituality for capitalism.
That would be very difficult, I guess. Tell me something.
Yeah.
Do you keep any tradition, Jewish traditions? Do you observe any rules or not anymore?
No, I mean, sometimes I get together with friends for a Jewish holiday and we have a nice meal, but I think that's the extent of it. I don't feel very bound to religious tradition.
How have you raised your son?
Very open. I mean, my son has had access to knowledge about all traditions and all communities. He knows that where we come from, but he also knows that the world is full of different identities and communities, and that he can define his own identity for himself, and he can, you know, live in a world that is comfortable with many identities coexisting. But I have to say, he also is really a child of his zeitgeist. You know, he has more important concerns than identity. Identity was something, you know, our generation was concerned with. His generation is concerned with the planet. You know, he's concerned with preserving the future.
But we were pretty much worried about identity, I guess. You wanted to belong to a community, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Have
he
you
is
ever
much less concerned about that.
Have you ever go back? I mean, do you keep in touch with somebody in the community in Satmar, or not anymore?
No, but I keep in touch with other people who've left.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that was it. When you left,
Yes.
that was
You
it.
have to make a clean break. It's the only way.
What
to
about
survive.
your ex-husband?
He left too,
as
but
well,
4
right?
years later. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you keep in touch?
Of course. Yeah, we have a son. Of course we keep in touch.
I know.
We're very much in
Yeah.
touch. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what about the series? Are you happy with the series?
Yes,
With
I
the
mean,
TV series?
I chose the women who worked on the series. So, you know, we talked about it for years before it became official. And, you know, I very much feel that I made the right decision. We went into it with a lot of clarity, like everything was clarified in advance and there were no surprises. And I feel that, you know, I chose absolutely the best possible team of women to realize this project.
There's
I mean,
a lot
look,
of
I mean, the impact, right? The impact is proof.
absolutely. Esty, I think she's amazing.
Yes.
Like when you watch her, you watch yourself when you were young. Well, younger, because you are very young.
I mean, Esty is her own person. She's inspired by me, but she's also there to reflect the experiences of other women who've left. You know, it's not just about me anymore. When I left, there were so few people like me, but today there are thousands. Experts estimate that 10% of the ultra-Orthodox community is leaving or has left. So Esty has to be more than just me. She has to stand in for all of these women who are on the same journey. So she has to pack a lot into that role.
And it happens to women in Orthodox community in all religions, right? I mean, Muslim, Catholic,
Yes.
all religions, yeah.
All religions and all conservative societies. And I have received letters from women all over the world with vastly different backgrounds who really connect to the experience, not just of oppression in general, but of bodily oppression. And for some reason, the series has resonated very intensely with Latin and Central America. And my theory about that is that Latin American and Central American women know very intimately what it is like to fight for freedom with your body.
That's correct. That's true. Absolutely true. Is there any second season or no? Or that's it?
I don't think so. I think the story has been told. You never know. Anything can happen, and people think out of the box. They get creative. Maybe, they go in a very different direction with the story. It's always a possibility, but right now there have been no discussions about it. But to be honest, there have been no discussions in general about shooting series, because in this crisis,
I know
everything has come to a halt. Yeah.
Now, you wrote a second book, which is Exodus, right?
Yes.
And it's like also about your journey, your own journey.
Yeah, it's about what happens after you leave. What are the struggles that you face when you have no one and nothing?
And you're working on something else right now?
I'm working on a novel, yeah.
On a novel, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm writing it in German.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And please tell your audience that we're really excited that a Spanish publishing house is translating Unorthodox.
Oh, great.
Yes, and they are publishing it in the fall, and that makes me very, very happy.
Oh, great. Have you ever been to Mexico or Latin America?
No,
Never.
No. I would love to. I don't know if it will ever be possible again, but I have never been yet. And, just experiencing the reactions from this part of the world, which is just overwhelming, has made me very curious, I have to admit.
Have to come. Yeah, you have to come and meet wonderful, wonderful women also. I admire you profoundly. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom. Bye.
Shabbat shalom.